because.
Yeah, today is the 29th of April, 2014, and we're here with Rollins
Rubsamen. All
And
right.
you were born?
I was born in San Antonio, Texas, 5/25/33.
Would you spell your last name so that?
It's Rubsamen. Rubsamen. Slightly German.
Okay, well, we're talking, he's been coming here and his family's been coming here for years and years, so.
You can grab that chair and pull it around.
And we're gonna go through a few pictures, we're gonna talk a little bit about the war times, because you have some memory in it. And
Yeah, a lot of memory.
And we didn't have a lot of that, because so many people went off to the war in that time frame. So people don't remember what was here in Port A much during that World War II time. So I've got some stuff to help us with that.
Perfect.
But I'm gonna go back to, your grandmother built this house in 1938, just off of 11th Street, where Ernest Brown's house is today,
That's right.
which Ernest Brown is a cousin.
What happened when the shack, we call this the shack, the house that blew down in 70 was on 1 acre of land, and it was divided between my mother and Ernest Brown's grandmother. And so anyway, this is Ernest Brown, the young Ernest Brown. The older Ernest Brown was my first cousin, and of course he's passed away.
I didn't know him.
And anyway, when that house blew down, we both split that 1 acre into 2 half acres, and so we had one Brown and one Rubsamen there. But both still, they were the daughters of Simona Walford. So anyway, we built a house there, and Ernest Brown built a house. Our house is a hexagonal looking house. It's got 3 parts to it.
It's got the single concrete
Yeah.
supports in the
Got
middle.
those single concrete. That was the house that we built.
And that was after 1970 storm?
That was after the 1970 storm, probably finished in 2000 and I would say 72 or 3.
1972, 1973.
Yeah, and anyway, it stayed in our family and my mother's family and everything. My brother bought it, and then my brother sold it, and when my brother sold it, young Ernest, that you know, bought it, and he still, as far as I know, he still owns it and he leases it out.
Okay.
But, and then he's got his house.
So he owns both?
Huh?
He owns both of the houses?
He owns both the houses.
Okay.
So that same 1 acre was there.
And you remember, I mean, you came here since you were born.
Yeah, and I'll tell you where we stayed, and I was thinking about this. Rupert Gresham, and that was, Skinny Gresham was his name, Daddy, and he was a friend of my father's, and they were all from San Antonio, and there was a circle right where the intersection is that we were talking about there, that you can either go straight to the ferry and that intersection from here, or you can go to down the island, to
That'd be
Kennedy
like
Causeway.
G and Alistair?
And on that corner, there was this big circle, and there were some small cottages put. They were not island cottages. They were owned by a man, and I thought I dreamed that I had his name, but
Are we talking about right on the corner, or were we all?
it was right by. If this is the main road, and this is the corner we're talking about, but it was right out here.
Okay, then that was the Buccaneer Courts.
It was. It had maybe 10 or 15
Yep.
small houses.
Right, it's where the Whataburger is now.
Well, I'm tired. I don't know what's
If you
there
haven't
now.
seen
But there was nothing else there except that, and there was a circular driveway, And everybody came there that were from San Antonio in the summertime for, you know, a week or something like that. And I was, at that time, I was just born. And I can remember maybe being 2 or 3 years old, and I'd stick my hand in what was called the icebox.
Right.
And those ice boxes were always closed in the wintertime because nobody stayed there. And when you opened them up, they had an odor to them that was, I thought it was the best odor in the world. It was just really unusual, and they put a 25-pound block of ice in there to keep it relatively cool.
And how long would that last
And that would last maybe at the most a couple of days
in the summer?
in the summer. But it was, you know, interesting, and when my grandmother built the house, it was just a few years after, and then we stopped, of course, going to that place and went to my grandmother's house. But so this had to be in probably from the 1930 to 1938. And in 1938, we were still doing the same thing. We had an ice box in this shack here, and it had electricity, but that was all. There was no thing. So I would walk down to the ice house where my first cousin, Ernest Brown Sr., this boy is here, Daddy, and he had a summer job there at the ice house. And I'd walk down from the shack with a pair of tongs, barefooted, and some shorts on. And I was probably 10 years old. I was strong enough, and I would haul a 25-pound block of ice back to the shack, and half of it would be melted.
And that ice house is right behind where we're sitting today.
The ice house, the old ice house is there.
It was.
It was there for years and years too. I mean, that was wonderful.
So what years do you have, were you here the most in the summers?
The most was when the polio epidemic broke out in San Antonio. And I'll give you an example. Alamo Heights High School had 3 boys that were seniors in 1950, and within 3 weeks, all 3 died. And they had been training, you know, it was in August, and so that wasn't a trigger mechanism. It had happened before, but that just shows you how bad it was, and it was unforgiving, as you know. Well, anyway, when that polio epidemic broke down, the schools closed somewhere around the end of April.
In 1950?
Way before then.
Oh, before that?
Yeah, in the 40s.
Okay.
In the 40s. And the war was maybe on or very close to ending when I can remember this happening. But what happened is that everything shut down. There was no television in those days. So what we did, we all played and went to various things like a skating rink, or we go to a movie. Well, we couldn't go where crowds were. They didn't allow you to go where crowds were, and parents were, you know, really nervous about their kids, you know, getting it. So you had to kind of be isolated.
So you spent a lot of time down here?
That's exactly what happened. My mother and my mother's sister, Ernest Brown Sr., you know, my cousin, and myself and my brother, and grandmother, some and all, but we lived down here for maybe 7 or 8 years in that space of time, because the school started in early October, and that was that.
So you did not go to school here at all?
Never went to school here, because I guess, you know, they did something with the school system in San Antonio. But it gave us an opportunity to, you know, really roam the streets and go out, and we hunted and fished and did everything, you know.
Now, so you were in Port A a lot of the times during the time of the war?
I was here all the time during the time of the war,
And to talk about that just a little bit, I mean, you know we have the gun mounts.
yeah.
Did you see those get constructed by any chance?
I saw them get constructed, and I saw them fired, and guys that ran it, you know, the Army, and those, I think, were 5-inch guns, and they would shoot a projectile, I remember, you know, maybe 30 miles or 20 miles, I mean, a long way, and they made more noise than you can imagine, and they would practice all the time. And we would walk up there, and those guys, when they weren't actually firing those guns, they'd let us go up there and see the tracks, and they'd show us how the guns moved. And then underneath was, we could peek in there, and they had carved out an entranceway underneath these big,
Right.
well, they're pretty good sized sand dunes. And they were bigger than, they seemed bigger then than they do now, but at any rate, underneath there was where they kept the projectiles.
So they
Now,
have,
physically, they weren't directly underneath the mount and the track.
No,
They were to the side.
A little bit to the side and down deep. Like, you know, if this is the top here, the roof here, they were way down under the ground.
Did they have steps or a ladder? How?
Not that I recall. You just, they honed it out, you know, and then they put stuff to, you know, keep it from caving in. But it was a safe place for the projectiles.
So it wasn't a concrete
Not,
room or something like that.
it could have been, but I don't think so. From what I can remember, it was just like, you know, they needed a place.
but was it on the same hill as the guns?
Exactly.
All the same?
Just right underneath, you know, off to the
Right.
side a little bit, but still there.
But they had to get to it by vehicle to unload.
Had to get vehicles to unload. And they would shoot out into the Gulf. And what was interesting too, in that same vein, Corpus Christi had the training for pilots. And from my grandmother's house, we saw all the time, I mean like day after day after day, there would be a tow vehicle or plane, a tow plane, and it had these big cables, and then there would be a target behind those cables, and they'd be flying out there, and here would come the trainees, you know, and they go, you could hear the machine guns in those planes going, da, 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 sound like little firecrackers going on, and they would shoot at the targets, and that was how they practiced the reality of what was going to happen, you know, when they turned them loose to go to Europe. And then you had the PT boats that the Coast Guard had, and those guys we used to go down there and pester them all the time. We'd be down there, and they'd let us come in there, and they were run by either a 16 or 18 not horsepower.
Cylinder?
Cylinder. They were twin engine, and they were Chrysler Marine engines. That's what I remember asking those guys. And they would take those boats out because these guys would sometimes crash. And it didn't make any difference what the weather was. Those cats they got in those things, and we'd watch them. We'd be on the jetties, and they'd have a call somewhere, and they would crash through, 20-foot waves and just.
Now, were they berthed in our cove by the Coast Guard station?
They were right where the Coast Guard station is today.
Okay. And another question is, we've heard, but not documented, that there were boats that would tow targets for the 5-inch guns to shoot at. Do you ever remember that, or were they just too long?
No, I don't remember. I'm sure that probably could have happened, but I never saw it because I guess the planes were so far out that you couldn't see them. Because those 5-inch guns, I mean, they launched one massive projectile. I mean, it was big time. Anyway, I was just trying to think that you had those PT boats, and I guess they were PT boats, but they were a recovery boat that looked like a PT boat, but they were really powerful things. And,
Do you remember if they were wooden hull or they
I don't think so. I think they were all metal.
metal hull?
Yeah, they were just, and they were loaded. Yeah, they had pretty good size weapons there because of the German submarines, which is a whole nother issue.
Right.
They were out here, and let me tell you this because it's interesting. When the Germans were known to have submarines in the Gulf of Mexico, a man by the name of Bob Smith, who was a lawyer in San Antonio, Texas, and also a very good friend of my father's. He was with a law firm. After having been, he was a attorney for, I can't remember exactly what the terminology is, but he worked for the federal government for a while in some capacity. And he was a very bright guy, and then he worked for Parker Smith and Rice there in San Antonio. And they called on him, and he became the #1 guy for security in the state of Texas, meaning that he had authority from Brownsville to Sabine Pass. And I talked with him because his daughter was my age, and we grew up together. And he would be down at my grandmother's house many, many times, and he'd tell us stories about what he was seeing and doing and so forth, and the massive number of submarines that were out in our Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, to fish in the Gulf of Mexico, you had to have a card.
Right. Photo ID.
It kind of a photo, it was different in those days.
Right.
But you had to have that type of clearance, and then you were restricted, I believe, to 3 miles. You couldn't go past 3 miles. Well, Bob Smith used to tell us, you know, there's this, this, and this going on, you know, all over the Gulf of Mexico. So in conjunction with that, one day, my brother and I were out, and you know, we were always on foot from the house. We didn't have a car or anything like that, so we just walked. And we were up there, and we were on the South Jetty, and sure enough, here comes the John Worthington being towed in, and I saw it. And I mean, I have a vivid picture in my mind of the John Worthington. And that hole had to be, I mean, so huge you could put a house in it. And it was right in the center of it, and it was listed.
We've actually have a picture, and I wish I'd have printed it, but we have a picture of somebody being inside the boat looking through that hole.
Yeah?
Of the hole.
Of the hole.
And I'll show you that.
It's gotta be great. Well, you know what happened, they towed it in, and they put it there on one of those dry docks.
Right.
And they left it there until after the war, and then they, you know, got the torches out and they reclaimed what they could, and they towed it right up there where it is today, sunk. But when they first towed it up there, we went up there all the time, and we climbed around in there and got up there, and it was about 40 feet tall at that time, and we jumped in the water. We thought that was really exciting.
And it was a oil tanker, was it?
It was an oil tanker.
And that's what the U-boats were focused on, is oil tankers.
That's why they were there, because you had all that oil that was in Corpus. The island, Harbor Island,
Right.
was loaded. You know, they had all these big 500 gallon
Sure.
or 5,000 gallon, whatever it was, 5,000 barrel tanks. And you could imagine what would happen if they fired some kind of projectile in there from the U-boats and set it on fire. The whole thing would blow up.
So the gun mount, do you remember them being built?
Yeah.
One question we've always had is, you know, which came first, chicken or the egg? Were the heels there, or did they build the heels?
No, they were there.
So they utilized 2 high dunes.
that they utilized the dunes. There was just south of my grandmother's house, was Big Hill. That was what it was called. It still is today, as far as I know.
Right.
And right behind Big Hill was a nice pond. We used to shoot ducks there. And then there were several ponds before you got there from my grandmother's house. One was just maybe like 3 blocks away. We called it Sweetheart, and we could hunt there. But the point is that particular spot had a tower,
Right.
real tall tower.
I may have some pictures
Let's see.
to help us with this. And this is an old Coast Guard handout of the war. And it talks a little bit about the duty of the Coast Guard and what they did. They had all the beach patrol
Yeah.
and so forth, and not sure where some of these are, so I'll get you to look at it, but in the dunes, we would have camps set up. Do you remember seeing any of those?
Yeah, we used to go pester them all the time.
Where were they located?
They were located south of us, in the dunes. And they, there were a lot of soldiers. I don't know if there were any Marines there, but there was a Navy shore patrol there. And so everything was under a high level of security, and you didn't mess around with it. One really funny story, and you'll love this. My brother and I, one evening, and our parents had gone someplace, and we were by ourselves, and we were hell bent on seeing if we could find a German U-boat that we could signal. And we thought if we could do that, that would help the guys, and they could blow it up or something.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm probably like 9, 10 years old. My brother's 2.5 years older. And we, at the front of my grandmother's house, there were steps going down, and right there's a little platform, and there was a light standard that was up there. So we screwed a light bulb in there. And this was in the days when if you had any light on in your house, you had to have it covered with a black screen. It was just, because everything was under serious. I mean, that was, from
The dark out.
it was a dark out. Absolutely was dark out. So anyway, we got there and we screwed that light bulb in, and then we started pulling the chain. And we pulled the chain because they'd figure it was something going on, and they'd respond. They'd be out there. Well, what responded was the shore patrol. And they came in there with jeeps, with machine guns and everything, but they knew us because my mother used to have kind of an open house when she was down here.
A lot of people would do that.
For breakfast. She'd say, okay, you boys, you spread the word, and y'all come have breakfast with her. And she'd have 20 dozen eggs and God knows what else. But anyway, she did that a lot. So they kind of knew that there were 2 little boys over there. But we did get into trouble. They told us not to do that anymore. And some, much more tire. We thought it was funny. and they did not. Think it was funny.
Well, these personnel camps,
Yeah.
they weren't just here, we understand they were all along the shore.
All along the shoreline, all the way down to the pass.
And afterwards, these little 20-foot by 20-foot houses made it all around town.
Oh, they did?
Oh, that, yeah, we've
Yeah.
got pictures of them all throughout town. And this is a blow-up of that. It's some marker.
This is a,
U.S. Coast Guard
it's a Coast Guard, it's a, yeah.
and a dog.
Yeah, the dog's there for a purpose.
What I'm looking for is, you can see the camp
Uh-huh.
tucked up in the dunes, and here's a type of a lookout tower.
That's one of them, yeah.
And
They all
Probably a
had
mess
machine
hall.
gun mounts on
Yeah.
those towers, yeah, and they had high-powered, telescopes and so forth.
right, and another view of that, and see it's got the lookout tower on a high dune. They would pick a high dune, and here's a picture of one of them towers, and that's what they would build You're saying they would pick, like on the big hill?
Yeah, on Big Hill and just other places, but some of them though, this is small. They had some that were really tall. You know, I mean, as I recall.
Depending on the hill that they had to
I
work
guess.
with, I guess.
Yeah, depending on the hill they had to work
Now, the
with.
big hill he's referring to is right off of Sandcastle Road where Gulf Palisades is today. And that's
That would
that's
be,
the hill he's referring to that was south of his grandmother's house.
exactly.
Another view,
Yeah.
and we have some pictures, I didn't print these out, but we have some pictures of the big light structures too. Do you remember the big spotlights?
I do, but not with any real knowledge of them. You know, we saw them go on. You know, you'd see them in the
Do you
sky.
remember where they might have been located?
Oh, well, they were all up and down the beach.
Okay.
That's where they were located.
Um, Just another,
You know, what's fascinating about all this is the fact that World War II on this island was more important as I grew up and got older and got, you know, to thinking about it. It was a serious, serious spot because it was one of the major entrances to the training group that were there at the, you know,
correct, naval station.
naval station, and then all of the oil that was there. And, you know, one of these cats, they could have come down the come to Corpus Christi Channel, you know, just come down there and dropped a few of their torpedoes and,
Took all that out.
you know, take it all out. So it was all real, real serious.
Just a picture of one of those type buildings, I mean, they were,
Yeah, and
Wow.
see the Jeeps and
and,
that's a big installation there.
we don't know all these locations. Now, this is a drawing of the gun mounts that we have, the museum has. And it's not to scale by any means or anything like that, but you've got labeling of the two gun mounts, and then you
Yep.
have GH and I and all that. And I'll give this to you. And like G is 5 timber magazines built on concrete footings covered to make up splinter-proof. Magazines loaded behind guns, unknown, mount
5
pimples.
timber magazines built on concrete footing, the sand to make them splinter-proof. Magazines located behind guns at unknown distance.
And then you have out here like.
Now, when they talk about a magazine being located, that probably is another thing they did with the missiles they had.
And see, like N is a M and N, and there's one on St. Joe's.
Never saw that one.
Probably didn't go over there, I guess, did you?
Well, we did go over there. We used to go there with a little skiff that we had, and we'd walk up and down the beach, and so forth and so on, but I don't ever remember.
Well, that was 1.67 miles north of the jetty, according to this document, and it was a
So-
7-foot by 9-foot platform.
Yeah.
So it was a ways up the beach,
There was ways
Be a
up
long
there.
ways.
Yeah, to be walking, you know.
and these were the searchlights that
These
we
were.
talked about.
Yeah.
And N is another one, and N is 8,800 feet south of the South Jetty, which is a mile and a half.
Yeah, long way.
Which would put you even a little farther than your house, and possibly
Probably so.
on that big hill, somewhere around in that area.
Somewhere around that area, there's no question about
I've
it.
measured that out before, and I don't recall exactly where it is, and then you've got J and K, so this is a good layout. I want you to take this with you, and you may it may bring things to mind as far as where things were and what you recall. But, we just don't have a lot of stories on back in the war days.
I'm just trying to think,
We don't have a picture of the guns in service.
No, we don't, and it would be of interest, do you remember specific guides, Teddy Matthews, Florida Roberts, and then how they operated during the war with their parties?
well, those that didn't go off to the, most of them were, what do you call them?
A lot of them signed up and went.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of the branch, what do you?
Boatmen.
Huh?
Boatmen.
both, yeah. But anyway, just like Buddy Hutchins. Hutchins was working for a real nice man, and he was so nice to us as kids, you know, he'd take us.
Lived over there by you.
Yeah, he lived in the house right below where Frank Murkison's house was, and he was there as an employee of Frank Murkison's, and he had a wheeler